My name is Jed Stone, or what's left of him, anyway. You might picture a miner as a brute, covered in coal dust, swinging a pickaxe, and for 50 years, you wouldn't be wrong. 50 years I spent chasing black veins through the bones of this earth, from the deepest pits of Kentucky to the shadowed hollows of West Virginia. The dark ain't just a place to me, it's a second home. The silence under 1,000 feet of rock, the slow drip of water, the groan of the earth settling, those were my lullabies. Never once did I think that deep down, in the very heart of the Appalachian mountains, I'd find something that would make the wildest tall tales of the hollows sound like bedtime stories. I was on my last job, a small independent operation, clearing out an old abandoned coal seam near what the locals call the Whispering Mounds. These ain't just any hills, these are ancient, man-made earthen structures, covered in trees and kudzu that rise out of the valleys like sleeping giants. The old-timers, the true mountain folk, they'll tell you these mounds were built by the ancient ones, beings who walked the earth before the rivers ran straight. They say if you listen close, especially at dusk, you can still hear voices, whispers from deep inside the earth. Superstition, of course. Miners don't have time for ghosts. We've got rock falls and methane pockets to worry about. But even I, Jed Stone, felt a chill sometimes working so close to those ancient, silent humps of earth. The seam I was working was played out and practically worthless. I was just there to strip the last bits of accessible coal before the company sealed it up for good. It was lonely work. Just me, my old mining cart, and the ever-present drone of the drills. One Tuesday, about 1,000 feet down, I hit something. It wasn't rock. It wasn't coal. It was different. The drill bit bit into it with a dull thud, not the sharp crunch of stone. And instead of grit, a fine, metallic dust started to plume out. I stopped the drill, my brow furrowed. I'd never seen anything like it. It was too hard for any natural mineral I knew and too smooth. I chipped away at the surrounding rock with my pickaxe, slowly, carefully. The closer I got, the stranger it felt. The air grew colder, drier. The usual damp scent of the mine was replaced by something else, something sterile, metallic, like ozone after a lightning strike. Finally, the rock gave way, revealing a flat, dark surface. It wasn't black. It was a deep, impossible charcoal, absorbing the light from my headlamp. It felt seamless, utterly unnatural. My hand ran over it, searching for a joint, a seam, anything. Nothing. It was a solid, alien wall. My curiosity, that old stubborn miner's curiosity, took hold. I kept digging, slowly expanding the hole, exposing more of the strange material. It wasn't a vein or a pocket, it was a structure, and it was massive. I spent the next 3 days just chipping away, opening a wider aperture. I didn't tell my foreman or anyone. A discovery like this, it felt like it belonged only to the dark and to me. Finally, the opening was big enough. A dark, narrow maw, revealing not solid rock, but empty space. An artificial tunnel. My heart hammered against my ribs, a rhythm I hadn't felt since I almost got caught in a cave-in decades ago. Every instinct told me to turn back, to seal the hole and report it. But the miner in me, the one who always had to know what was around the next bend, pushed me forward. I grabbed my lamp, my trusted pick, and my bag, and I squeezed through. The air inside was still and cold like a tomb, but it was clean too, almost invigorating. My lamp cut through the absolute black, revealing a tunnel of the same impossible material I'd chipped through. But this wasn't just a tunnel. It was perfectly smooth, wide enough for a truck, and stretched so far into the darkness that my lamp couldn't find an end. The walls pulsed faintly with a barely perceptible internal glow. a very deep, quiet hum that seemed to resonate in the fillings of my teeth. It was a sound that had been sleeping for a very, very long time. I walked for what felt like miles, deeper and deeper beneath the whispering mounds. The tunnel twisted and turned, always smooth, always humming. I saw no tools, no markings, no sign of any human presence, ancient or otherwise. This wasn't built by any ancient ones I'd ever heard of. This was beyond us. This was alien. The realization hit me like a physical blow, a cold dread mixing with a thrilling sense of awe. Then the tunnel opened up. My lamp beam, which had seemed so powerful in the narrow passage, was swallowed up by the sheer immensity of the space before me. I stood on a precipice, looking down into a vast, gargantuan cavern. It wasn't carved out of rock, it was a void, perfectly spherical, stretching for what had to be miles in every direction. And in the very center of that impossible void, suspended by unseen forces, was a single, colossal object. It was shaped like a disc, thousands of feet across, its surface a kaleidoscope of the same dark, absorbent material as the tunnel walls. But this wasn't just a disc, it was a city. Spurting from its surface were elegant, soaring towers of crystal and metal, glowing with faint internal light. Lines of energy pulsed along its surface like dormant arteries. It was a machine, a vessel, an alien city hidden for millennia under the Appalachian mountains, sleeping. And as I stared at its colossal, silent majesty, I realized with a chilling certainty that my drilling, my digging, my clumsy intrusion had just woken it up. The hum, the subtle vibration in the air was growing stronger, and something within the depths of that silent city was beginning to stir.
For a long time, I just stood there on the edge of that impossible cliff, a forgotten man staring at a forgotten city. Fear is a familiar friend to a miner. You learn to live with it, to respect it. But this was different. This wasn't the fear of a rock fall or a gas pocket. This was a deep, soul-shaking dread, the kind of fear a microbe must feel upon realizing it's living inside a god. My first instinct was to scramble back through the tunnel, seal the hole, and never speak of this again. But my legs wouldn't move. My eyes were locked on the sight before me, a silent, sleeping Leviathan hanging in the void. And then it began to wake. It started not with a sound, but with light. A soft, milky white glow began to pulse from the very heart of the central tower. The pulse was slow, rhythmic, like a colossal heart starting to beat after a million-year slumber. With each beat, lines of light would trace across the city's surface, illuminating intricate patterns that were invisible before. More towers began to glow, one by one, their light spreading like a slow-motion sunrise across the alien architecture. The low hum I'd felt in the tunnel intensified, rising in pitch, becoming a complex harmony of sounds, a symphony of awakening machines. The city wasn't just waking up, it was noticing me. A single, brilliant beam of white light shot out from the central spire. It moved without a sound, impossibly fast, and stopped directly on me, bathing me in its warm, gentle glow. It wasn't a weapon. It felt like a caress. I was paralyzed, bathed in this pure, analytical light. I felt no pain, only a strange, tingling sensation, as if every cell in my body was being counted and cataloged. And then the thoughts came. They weren't words. They weren't in English or any other language. They were raw feelings, images, concepts poured directly into my mind. I felt an age so vast it buckled my knees, eons spent drifting in the cold, silent dark between galaxies. I saw flashes of burning suns and shattered worlds, and beneath it all, a single, piercing question, not spoken, but felt, a query of pure, unadulterated curiosity. What is this? It wasn't asking who I was. It was asking what I was. What this strange, fleeting, chaotic spark of life was that had stumbled into their eternal, ordered silence. The light receded, pulling the alien thoughts with it, and I collapsed to my knees, gasping for air as if I just surfaced from a deep-water dive. The weight of that momentary contact was crushing. I was an ant that had just been noticed by a mountain. Shaken, I looked up again. The city was now fully illuminated, a breathtaking jewel of light and shadow in the eternal dark of the cavern. And something new had appeared. From the ledge where I knelt, a pathway of solid, white light extended out across the void, connecting my world to theirs. A bridge, an invitation. Every rational part of my mind screamed at me to run, but my entire life had been spent crawling in the dark, always digging, always needing to know what lay beyond the next wall of rock. This was the ultimate wall, and they had just opened a door. I got to my feet, my legs trembling, and took a step onto the bridge of light. It felt solid under my boots, warm and humming with the same energy as the city. I walked, one step after another, leaving the familiar dusty rock of my world behind, and headed out into the abyss. Stepping onto the city itself was like entering another dimension. The scale was overwhelming. Towers soared into the darkness above, their peaks lost in the gloom. The ground beneath my feet was the same seamless, dark material, but it was soft, almost yielding. There were no streets, no doors, no windows. The entire city flowed with a kind of organic, alien geometry. I reached out and touched the wall of a nearby structure. It rippled at my touch, the surface momentarily becoming a transparent screen showing me a star chart of a galaxy I had never seen, filled with swirling nebulae of impossible colors. The city wasn't just built, it was alive. I wandered deeper, an intruder in a silent Eden. I saw no one, no signs of life other than the city itself. I eventually came to a vast, open plaza in the center of the disk. As I stepped into it, shimmering figures of light flickered into existence all around me. They were holograms, ghosts, tall, impossibly slender beings with long limbs and graceful movements. Their faces were serene, beautiful, and utterly alien. They were reenacting a memory, a moment frozen in time. I watched, mesmerized, as the holographic beings calmly moved towards pods embedded in the plaza floor, lying down as a soft light enveloped them. It was the moment they went to sleep, the moment their city went to sleep. I was witnessing their last goodnight. But as I watched the memory play on a loop, I noticed something that chilled me to the bone. Just before the last of the beings entered its pod, it looked up towards the sky, the roof of the cavern we were in, and on its serene, holographic face was a look of unmistakable, profound fear. They weren't just going to sleep. They were hiding. And at that exact moment, a deep, resonant boom echoed through the cavern. It was a sound of immense weight and power, and it didn't come from the alien city. It came from outside, from somewhere deep within the rock of the mountains themselves. The entire city vibrated from the impact, and I was thrown to my knees. The holographic memory vanished. The lights in the city flickered, some towers going dark. The awakening symphony became a discordant, panicked alarm. I stared out into the darkness of the cavern beyond the city, my blood running cold. I had just found a secret vault, hidden away for millions of years, and I had just heard the sound of something on the outside, still trying to break in.
The echo of that first boom was more than just a sound. It was a concussion that tore through the very fabric of the silence that had protected this place for millennia. The city, which had been waking with a gentle, curious grace, was instantly thrown into a state of violent alarm.
The harmonious hum became a discordant screech. Red lights flashed across the crystalline towers, painting the cavern in strobes of crimson and shadow. The bridge of solid light I had walked across vanished in an instant, leaving me stranded, a castaway on an island of alien technology in the middle of a subterranean sea of darkness. I was no longer an explorer. I was a prisoner. The city itself seemed to clench like a fist. Massive, seamless plates on the outer hull of the disk began to move, sliding and reconfiguring with a deep, grinding groan. Pylons and emitters I hadn't seen before rose from hidden compartments. A shimmering, translucent dome of energy flickered to life, enveloping the entire city in a protective bubble. This wasn't just a city. It was a fortress, and its ancient automated defense systems were coming online. From my terrifyingly exposed position in the central plaza, I saw the source of the attack. Far across the cavern, a section of the rock wall, miles from the mine shaft I had entered, was glowing a molten cherry red. It pulsed, and with another deafening boom, the rock exploded inward, sending a shower of debris tumbling into the void. From the newly carved fiery tunnel, they began to pour. They weren't creatures of flesh and blood. They were things of the deep earth, horrors born in the crushing pressure and eternal dark. They were a swarm. Insectoid in shape, each the size of a large dog, they moved with a frantic, skittering energy. Their bodies seemed to be made of jagged black rock, and they had multiple limbs that ended in razor-sharp crystalline shards. They had no eyes, but their wide, gaping maws were filled with teeth that looked like spinning drill bits. They were the planet's antibodies, the chthonic horrors that consumed anything not made of stone. They were the reason the city had hidden itself here. They were the lock on the outside of the vault. The city's defenses answered immediately. Beams of pure, white-hot energy, thin as a needle, lanced out from the towers. They struck the first wave of the rock creatures with perfect accuracy. There was no sound, just a silent flash, and the creatures vaporized into dust. The defense was devastatingly effective, but the swarm was endless. For every dozen that were disintegrated, 100 more poured from the breach, a relentless tide of chittering, grinding rock and crystal, driven by a single, voracious hunger. They were trying to reach the city. Panic finally broke my paralysis. I ran, scrambling for any kind of cover, my miner's boots slipping on the smooth alien surface. I found an opening in the base of one of the smaller towers, a doorway that opened with a hiss as I approached. I dove inside just as an energy beam seared the air where I had been standing. The interior of the tower was quiet, shielded from the chaos outside, and it was filled with pods. Hundreds of them, stacked in silent, elegant rows stretching up into the darkness. Inside each one, I could see the serene, sleeping form of the tall, slender beings from the holograms. I understood with a sudden, chilling clarity. This wasn't just a city or a fortress. It was an ark, a lifeboat carrying the last survivors of a long-dead civilization, sleeping through the eons, waiting for the danger to pass. But the danger had never left. Outside, the creatures were changing their tactics. Their frontal assault had failed, so they were adapting. The booming sounds started coming from all around the cavern, no longer from a single point. The swarm was spreading out, chewing new tunnels through the rock with their crystalline teeth, trying to find a weakness, a blind spot in the city's defenses. The energy shield flickered under the strain of multiple simultaneous impacts. I stumbled deeper into the tower, my lamp cutting through the dim ambient light. I could see alien consoles along the walls, their surfaces covered in glowing, incomprehensible symbols. But I didn't need to read their language to understand the universal meaning of a power gauge dropping towards empty. After millions of years of hibernation, the city's energy reserves were critically low.
The automated defenses were draining the last of its lifeblood. That's when I saw it. One of the pods, near the base of the tower, was damaged. A hairline fracture, likely caused by the shock wave of the first boom, ran across its translucent surface. The life-sustaining light inside was flickering. I moved closer, my breath catching in my throat. The face of the alien inside was no longer serene. Its elegant features were frozen in a silent, petrified scream. Its eyes were wide with the terror it had felt in the last moments of its long dream. The seal had been broken. It was dead. I looked from the dead sleeper to the failing power gauges, and the final horrifying piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The creatures outside weren't just trying to destroy the city. They were drawn to its energy. They were trying to crack it open like a geode to feast on the power and the life within. This city wasn't just a fortress to them. It was a pantry, and I was locked inside with the last meal.
For a man who has spent his life in the dark, I'd never felt more powerless. I was a spectator at the end of a world, watching a silent, glittering city die. The energy beams from the towers were noticeably weaker now, sputtering like a dying flashlight. The defensive shield around the city flickered violently with every impact from the chittering horde. They were making progress, hundreds of them now clinging to the outer hull, their crystalline teeth grinding against the energy field, creating an agonizing screech that I could feel through the soles of my boots. They were wearing it down, breaking the shell to get to the yolk. I looked from the dying defenses to the dead alien and her broken pod. A wave of anger, hot and clean, cut through my fear. These creatures, these sleeping innocents, had crossed the universe only to be eaten in their sleep by the vermin of this world? It wasn't right. But what could I do? I was a miner, a man of rock, dust, and dynamite. I couldn't write alien code or repair a fusion reactor. My hands were built for a pickaxe, not a plasma conduit. Frustrated, I turned my attention to one of the glowing consoles, the one displaying the city's rapidly depleting power. A schematic of the disc-shaped city dominated the screen. I couldn't read the symbols, but I understood the diagram. It was a power grid, a central core, the reactor, with lines of energy flowing out to the towers, the shields, the life support systems. The basics were the same anywhere, I guessed. But then I saw something that made my breath catch. There was another set of conduits. A massive primary system that was completely dark, completely dormant. Unlike the others, these conduits didn't lead to systems within the city. They led down from the belly of the ship and into the darkness of the void below. They weren't designed to send power out. They were designed to draw it in. My mind, accustomed to thinking about the Earth in terms of layers and resources, started to race. Why build a city that could plug into something? You don't hide from a monster in a house that needs an extension cord. Unless the plan wasn't just to hide. The plan was to refuel, to recharge. I thought of my own work, drilling into a coal seam to tap the stored energy of 1,000,000 years of sunlight. These aliens had done the same thing. They'd found the perfect hiding spot, a geologically stable cavern right on top of a massive geothermal vent. They had parked their city on top of a planetary battery, but for some reason they had gone to sleep before they could plug it in. The problem was, the activation sequence was likely some complex, delicate alien procedure, but I didn't see a delicate problem. I saw a mining problem. They needed to connect their machine to the planet's core. They needed a hole, a conduit, and I was the best damn hole puncher in the state of West Virginia. The thought of my tools, my cart, my drills sitting uselessly in that tunnel miles across the void was a fresh sting of despair. But then, my hand went to the worn leather satchel still slung over my shoulder. My emergency kit. The one I never went underground without. I unbuckled it, my heart starting to pound with a new wild hope. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were 4 sticks of dynamite, a handful of blasting caps, and a detonator. It wasn't enough to blow a mountain, but it was more than enough to give it a swift, hard kick in the guts. The plan that formed was terrifying. It was insane. It was a miner's plan. I had to get off this city, get down to the rock face of the cavern floor below, find the vent, and use my dynamite to fracture the rock, to open a channel for the planet's raw heat and energy to connect with the city's dormant intake conduits. It meant climbing down the outside of a floating alien fortress in the middle of a battle into a darkness that was likely miles deep. I looked over at the sleeping alien in her broken pod, her face a frozen mask of terror. I didn't know her name or her world, but in that moment, she was all that mattered. I gave her a slow nod, a silent promise. I ain't gonna let him get you. I found an emergency access hatch in the floor of the tower, the purpose of which was clear in any language. It hissed open, revealing the terrifying, swirling void below. The shriek of the creatures grinding on the hull was louder now. The air was filled with the smell of ozone from the failing shield. I took the dynamite, my rope, and my pickaxe. I said a silent goodbye to the only world I had ever known. Then, I stepped out onto the skin of the sleeping city. I was a flea on the back of a whale. The sheer, curved hull stretched out around me, vast and smooth. The battle raged above, a flickering light show of failing defenses. Below me, nothing. Just a blackness so complete it felt like it could swallow the world. I secured my rope to a thick external conduit, took a deep breath of the strange metallic air, and began to climb down into the abyss. I was just a miner, with a hammer and a prayer, going to work.
Clinging to the outside of that alien machine was like being a barnacle on the hull of God's own ship. The scale of it was dizzying, a curving, metallic landscape that fell away into a bottomless black. The rope was thin and worn in my hands, my only connection to anything solid. Above me, the battle raged, a flickering, dying light show. The screech of the rock creatures grinding on the hull was a physical vibration that ran through the rope, up my arms, into my teeth. The descent was a nightmare. Chunks of vaporized creature and shattered bits of the city's hull rained down around me in the darkness. More than once, one of the rock things, blasted off the shield by a defensive beam, came tumbling past me, its crystalline claws grasping at nothing. My world was the circle of light from my headlamp, the worn rope in my gloves, and the terrifying, endless drop below. I didn't look down. A miner knows you never look down. You focus on the next handhold, the next footstep. You trust the rope. After what felt like a lifetime of this terrifying vertical crawl, my boots finally scraped against something solid. I was there, the floor of the cavern. I unclipped from the rope and stood for a moment, my legs shaking, looking up. The city was a wounded star hanging in the sky miles above me, its lights flickering, the sounds of the battle now faint and distant. Down here, the darkness was almost total. The air was thick and heavy with a strange metallic tang. I was in my element again. This was the deep earth. I might not understand the alien city, but I understood rock. I placed my bare hand on the cavern floor. It was warm, a deep, ancient warmth that spoke of immense pressure and power far below. I was on the right track. This wasn't a job for my eyes, but for my instincts.
I started walking, my headlamp cutting a weak path through a landscape of bizarre crystalline formations that grew like twisted trees. I could feel the heat growing, a subtle change in the air, a vibration in the stone beneath my feet. I was following the heat, tracking the geothermal vent like a hunter tracks a wounded animal. But I wasn't alone down here. The floor of the cavern was crawling with them. Swarms of the rock creatures skittered through the crystal forests, their forms barely visible in the gloom. They were gathering in massive numbers at the base of the cavern, drawn by the energy of the city above, trying to find a way to climb. I had to move like a ghost, sticking to the shadows, my soft-soled miner's boots making barely a sound. The 50 years I'd spent moving through treacherous, unstable tunnels were now the only thing keeping me alive. Finally, I found it. A massive, sealed fissure in the rock, hundreds of feet wide. It looked like a scar on the face of the planet. The air around it shimmered with heat, and the warmth coming off it was like standing in front of a blast furnace. This was the main artery, the heart of the mountain. This was the spot. I pulled the 4 precious sticks of dynamite from my satchel. It was like trying to knock down a castle wall with a slingshot. A normal blast would barely scratch the surface. This couldn't be a normal blast. This had to be surgery. I used my pickaxe to chip away small pockets in the rock around the fissure's edge, searching for the fault lines, the stress points. Every miner knows that you don't fight the mountain, you persuade it. You find its weaknesses and you give it a little push. I placed my charges with the care of a watchmaker, wiring the blasting caps together, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. This would be my masterpiece, my final defiant signature on the wall of the world. I set the timer for 5 minutes. The moment the timer started ticking, I was moving, scrambling back to the rope. Now came the hard part, the climb. I clipped in and started pulling myself up, hand over hand, my muscles screaming in protest. The darkness that had been my ally was now my enemy. I couldn't see how far I had to go. Down below, they had seen me. A chittering cry went up, and the swarm on the floor turned, a wave of black rock and sharp crystal, and surged towards the base of my rope. They started to climb, one over the other, a living, writhing ladder of monsters. I climbed faster, my lungs burning, my arms turning to lead. I could hear them below me, getting closer, the scrape of their claws on the rope. The city's shield above me gave a final violent flicker and died. The screeching of the creatures on the hull grew louder, triumphant. It was over. Then my timer ran out. The explosion from below was not the sharp crack of dynamite. It was a deep, world-shattering groan, as if the planet itself was clearing its throat. I had not just broken the seal, I had given the mountain the push it needed. A jet of pure, white-hot plasma and raw energy, a controlled volcanic eruption, roared from the fissure I had created. It was a pillar of raw, planetary power, a solid column of light and heat that shot upwards through the center of the cavern, illuminating the entire abyss in a flash of blinding white. It was heading directly for the underbelly of the alien city, for the dormant intake conduits, and I was hanging right in its path, clinging to a rope, a moth about to be incinerated by a new, man-made sun.
I braced for the end, for the fire that would unmake me in an instant. I closed my eyes, a lifetime of darkness and dust flashing before them. But the fire never came. The pillar of pure energy, this raw, untamed piece of the planet's core, hit the underside of the city with the force of a meteor strike. But it didn't destroy it. The dormant conduits I had seen on the schematic lit up, glowing a brilliant, hungry white. They were drinking it in, a starving machine finally given a feast. The entire city became a conduit, a channel for the raw power of the earth. And I was caught in the middle of it. The energy didn't burn me. It passed through me. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, I was no longer Jed Stone, a man of flesh and bone. I was pure sensation.
I felt the immense, crushing pressure of the planet's core, the slow, patient grinding of tectonic plates, the ancient memory of the rock itself. It was a billion years of geological history flooding my mind in a single overwhelming second. But it wasn't just the planet I was feeling. As the energy surged upwards, through me and into the city, it connected with the sleepers. I was no longer just in my own mind, I was in theirs. I was standing on a world with a silver sky, watching crystalline towers crumble into dust. I felt the heartbreak of a billion souls as their world died, not in fire, but in a cold, silent wave of erasure from some unseen enemy. I felt their desperate flight, a handful of survivors in this one great arc, jumping blindly across the void, looking for a quiet, geologically stable backwater where they could sleep and wait for the echoes of their murdered civilization to fade. I felt their hope as they found this world, our Earth, in its infancy. I felt their fear as they detected the chthonic, hungry life teeming in its crust, the rock creatures. And I felt their final, weary decision to go to sleep, to hide, parking their ark above the geothermal vent, setting a timer not for years, but for eons, waiting for the planet's crust to cool and the deep things to starve. They had planned to refuel, but something had gone wrong. Their hibernation had been too deep. The automated systems had failed to initiate the final connection. Until I came along and gave it a kick with a few sticks of dynamite. I was living their entire history, their hopes, their fears, their long, lonely sleep. And they, in turn, were experiencing mine. The sleeping city, this great silent consciousness, was feeling 50 years of coal dust, the camaraderie of the mines, the simple taste of coffee on a cold morning, the sting of loss, the stubborn, irrational human will to keep digging, to keep fighting, even when the seam runs dry. We were connected, the last human and the last of them, joined by a pillar of fire. The surge of power was a defibrillator to the city's heart. It came back to life, not with a groan, but with a triumphant, resonant song that vibrated through the entire cavern floor. The towers glowed with a renewed, brilliant light. The defensive shield snapped back into existence, a dome of impenetrable golden energy. The rock creatures that were still clinging to the hull were vaporized in an instant. The swarm below, caught in the afterglow of the plasma eruption, reeled in confusion. Then, the city spoke. Not to me, but to them. A low, powerful, resonant frequency, a wave of pure sonic force washed over the cavern floor. It wasn't a sound of aggression. It was a command, a statement of authority. It was the voice of a being telling the ants to get out of its house. And the ants listened. The entire chittering horde turned as one and scrambled back into the tunnels from which they had come, disappearing into the deep rock. The pillar of energy from the vent subsided, its job done. The city now hummed with a quiet, immense, self-sustaining power. I was left dangling on my rope, my body and mind trembling from the aftershock of the connection. I was just Jed Stone again. But I was different. I was more. A single, gentle beam of white light detached from the city and enveloped me, lifting me from the rope. It carried me upwards, not with the cold, analytical touch from before, but with a gentle warmth, a feeling of gratitude. It floated me back up to the main plaza, where a single figure was waiting for me. One of the pods had opened, and standing there, bathed in the soft light of her newly awakened city, was one of the alien beings. She was tall, impossibly slender, her skin like polished marble, her large, dark eyes filled with an ancient, weary wisdom. She was not a hologram. She was real, alive. She raised a long, elegant hand, not to her head, but to her chest. And in my mind, I heard not a torrent of data, but a single, clear, perfectly formed thought. A voice ancient and beautiful that I now recognized as my own. Thank you, Miner.
There we stood, in the heart of the silent, awakened city. The old miner and the ancient alien. The air, which had been filled with the screech of battle, was now still, humming with the quiet, confident power of the recharged city. The fear was gone. After sharing a consciousness, after feeling the entire history of a species flow through you, fear seems like a small, petty thing. I was looking not at an alien, but at the last survivor of a tragedy so immense I couldn't comprehend it. The telepathic voice in my head was no longer a jumble of raw data. It was clear, calm, and tinged with a weariness that felt older than the mountains around us. My designation is not a sound, she explained, her elegant hand gesturing to the sleeping pods that lined the tower. It is a function. I am the caretaker. I am the last one awake to watch over the long sleep. She confirmed what I had seen in the vision. They were a race of explorers, artists, and builders from a world that breathed music and light. They were not warriors, and when the enemy came, they had no defense. She called it the static. Not a race, not an empire, but a consuming force, a plague of self-replicating, energy-devouring nanites that swarmed through the galaxy, hunting for the signatures of advanced technology. It didn't conquer civilizations, it dismantled them, atom by atom, turning their art, their science, their people into more of itself. A great silent gray tide that erased everything it touched. We were one of the last to escape, the caretaker projected, her thoughts laced with an ancient grief. This city, this ark, was our final desperate act. We jumped blindly across unimaginable distances, a single seed cast into the cosmic wind, hoping to find a place to lay fallow, a place of deep quiet. They found Earth, a young, chaotic, but geologically stable world, rich in geothermal energy they would need to one day reawaken. They detected the primitive, voracious rock creatures in the crust, but they were a manageable threat. The true danger was the static. Their plan was to hide in the deep rock, a perfect cosmic camouflage. By going fully dormant, their city would emit no more energy than a common mineral deposit. They would sleep for millions of years, hoping that by the time they awoke, the echo of the static's great hunt would have finally faded from the galaxy. But you, the caretaker's thought turned to me, not with accusation, but with a sad irony. In saving us from the small monsters, you have announced our presence to the Great One. The power you unleashed, the battle, the shield. We are no longer a silent stone. We are a lighthouse, shining in the dark, and the static is always watching for new light. A cold dread settled in my stomach. So, they're coming for you, I said aloud, my rough voice sounding alien in the pristine city. They are, she confirmed. We do not know when, a century, a millennium, but they have our scent now. The hunt has begun again. The caretaker and I stood in silence for a long moment, two beings from different ends of time, facing the same impossible problem. Her people were still asleep. To wake them now would be to condemn them to a life of fear, waiting for an inevitable end. But to leave them sleeping was to let them be consumed without ever having lived again. Well, I said, my miner's pragmatism kicking in. You can't just sit here and wait for the roof to cave in. Can this city move? Can you jump again? Find a deeper hole. The caretaker's next thought was heavy, the mental equivalent of a bowed head. We cannot. The jump to this world was a one-way trip. It shattered our spatial drive beyond repair. We used the last of our civilization's power to get here. We are stranded. But the power, I said, gesturing to the humming city. You're recharged now. Yes, she replied. The geothermal energy of your world is a wonderful power source. It is strong, stable. It can sustain our life support, our shields, our sleepers for another 1,000,000 years. But it is crude. It is the energy of a bonfire. To repair our drive, to even begin to mend the fabric of space-time, we need the energy of a star, a focused, refined, volatile power we do not have. She turned her large, dark eyes to me. Her gaze was intense, analytical, and filled with a new, terrifying idea. She didn't know what I was, but she had felt my life, my memories. She had seen through my eyes the world of humanity that had grown on the surface while she slept. A world of chaos, war, and primitive, brutal technology. She projected a final image into my mind. It was not a memory, it was a diagram, a schematic of an atom, a heavy, unstable nucleus bombarded by a single neutron, splitting apart and releasing an unimaginable burst of energy. She didn't know the word, but I did. Your kind, the caretaker's thought was hesitant, almost fearful. This crude, loud, fleeting race that has inherited this world. In my brief connection with you, I saw a memory, a great white flash in a desert, a mushroom cloud, a city turned to ash. You have found the heart of the star. You have learned how to break it. Tell me, miner, tell me about this nuclear fire. I stood frozen. The old coal miner from West Virginia, being asked to explain the atomic bomb to a refugee from another galaxy. The only tool that could save her people was the one my own kind had just invented and had already used to threaten our own extinction.
Explaining the atomic bomb to a being who had crossed galaxies was the strangest, most terrible thing I have ever done. I didn't have the words, the physics, the equations. All I had were the memories. My memories. A coal miner from the hills of West Virginia. My knowledge came from newspapers read by the dim light of a headlamp, from crackling radio reports in the bunkhouse, from the grim, hushed conversations of men who had seen their sons go off to a war that ended with 2 flashes of man-made lightning. I didn't speak. I just thought. I thought of the newsreels, of the flattened, ghostly outlines of cities named Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I thought of the fear, the terrible, world-changing fear that had settled over all of us in the years after the war. The knowledge that we, the loud, chaotic children of this planet, had finally found a way to smash our own cradle to pieces. The caretaker received these thoughts in horrified silence. Her mind, accustomed to the elegant, controlled energies that built her city, recoiled from the sheer brutal violence of nuclear fission. It was, to her, like explaining the beauty of an axe to a tree. You burn your own world to create this power? She projected, a tremor of disbelief in her thoughts. It's all we have, I said, my voice hoarse. It's a terrible, ugly thing, but it's strong. Strong as a star, just like you said. A new kind of silence fell between us, a negotiating silence. We both understood the horrifying bargain that was now on the table. She had a broken-down ark, filled with the last of her kind. I was the representative of a species that had just stumbled upon the most destructive force in the universe. She needed our fire to escape. We, in turn, were a young, reckless species playing with a power we didn't understand, a power that would inevitably lead to our own destruction. This static, the caretaker's thought, was slow, deliberate. It is a patient hunter, but it is also a predictable one. It follows the light. It follows the noise of advanced technology. Your world is still quiet on a cosmic scale. Your radio waves are a faint whisper. Your nuclear fire is a brief, angry spark. But you are learning. You will build bigger fires. You will shout louder into the dark. And one day soon, the static will hear you, and it will come for you just as it came for us. She was right. The path humanity was on, the Cold War, the arms race, it was an open invitation to the very thing that had destroyed her civilization. We were lighting the bonfire that would attract the wolves. There is, perhaps, a symbiosis in our desperation, she proposed, a trade. Your species provides us with the means to repair our drive, the fissile materials, the knowledge to trigger the reaction. In return, we will do two things. First, before we leave, we will scrub this solar system of our own technological signature. We will erase our trail so that the static, when it comes looking for us, will not find you. We will, in effect, make your world invisible again. Second, we will leave you a gift, not a weapon, not a power source, a warning, a key. She projected a final stunning image into my mind. It was a map of the galaxy, but not of stars. It was a map of the static, a shifting, swirling chart of the great silent tide, showing where it had consumed, where it was dormant, and the safe, quiet pathways that still remained. It was the most valuable piece of information in the universe, a guide to surviving the dark. How do I do this? I asked, the weight of the decision crushing me. I'm one man. I'm trapped down here. The world up there, they won't listen to an old miner with a crazy story. You will not be alone, the caretaker replied. She turned and gestured to a series of pods near the plaza. They hissed open, and from within, 5 more of her kind emerged from their long sleep. They were not caretakers. They were different. Their minds felt sharper, more analytical. Engineers, scientists. We will give you the tools. We will teach you what to look for. We will show you how to build the devices needed to communicate with us, to guide your people. But you must be our voice, our hands in your world. You must convince them. It was an impossible task. To walk out of this mine and somehow convince a paranoid, divided world to hand over its most precious, dangerous materials to a ghost in a mountain? To become a prophet for a silent alien god, offering salvation in exchange for the instruments of our own apocalypse? I looked at the newly awakened aliens, their ancient wise eyes all fixed on me. I thought of the world above, so full of life and chaos, so beautifully, terribly ignorant of the cosmic horrors lurking in the dark. To do nothing was to condemn both our species to extinction. To act was to take the greatest gamble in human history. "All right," I said, my voice a low, gravelly whisper. "All right, tell me what I need to do."
The aliens, the Silurians as I now knew them, spend weeks preparing me. They were masters of information, and they poured it into me. Not the overwhelming deluge from before, but a careful, precise education. Their scientists taught me how to recognize the geological signatures of uranium and thorium deposits. Their engineers showed me the principles of their technology, not so I could build it, but so I could identify the human equivalents. They gave me 2 devices. The first was a small, smooth, Dork stone that felt warm to the touch. It was a communication relay, a way for me to maintain a faint, long-range telepathic link with the caretaker. It would allow her to guide me, to lend me her knowledge when I needed it most. The second was a scanner, a device disguised as an old brass and wood surveyor's transit. It was far more advanced. It could analyze the quantum signature of any material from a distance, telling me not just if an element was present, but its exact isotopic purity. It was a dowsing rod for the atomic age. When my education was complete, they showed me the way out. Not back through the collapsed mine shaft I had entered, but through a hidden path, an ancient lava tube that the city had widened and sealed millennia ago. It was a secret back door, emerging in a secluded, forgotten hollow deep in the Appalachian forest, miles from where I had started. I stepped out into the sun, and the world I had left behind rushed in to meet me. The feeling of warm sunlight on my skin, the sharp, clean scent of pine and damp earth, the symphony of birdsong. It was almost too much. The world seemed impossibly vibrant, beautiful, and heartbreakingly fragile. I was the same old Jed Stone, but I was a different man. The coal dust had been washed away, replaced by the weight of 2 species, and a secret that could save them both, or shatter everything. I made my way back to my small, isolated cabin on the ridge. To the outside world, it looked as if old Jed had simply gone on one of his long prospecting trips and gotten lost for a spell. I looked at myself in the cracked mirror, gaunt, my hair now almost completely white, my eyes holding a depth that hadn't been there before. I looked like a man who had seen a ghost. In a way I had, a whole city of them. The mission was clear, but the path was not. I couldn't walk into the Pentagon and tell them an alien city under a mountain needed a nuclear reactor. I'd die in a padded cell. The caretaker and I agreed we had to be subtle. We had to gather the materials ourselves, piece by piece. We had to start a conspiracy of salvation. Using the relay stone, the caretaker helped me sift through the public records of this new, post-war world. We needed a starting point, not a military fortress like Los Alamos, but somewhere smaller, less guarded, a place where brilliant minds and dangerous materials came together. Our search led us to Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and to a young, fiercely intelligent nuclear physicist working at the university. Her name was Dr. Arlene Holloway. She was a genius, a rising star in her field, but her recently declassified papers showed a deep disillusionment with the military's application of her work. She was a builder, being forced to make bombs. She was the perfect first recruit. I found her a week later, sitting on a park bench on campus, eating her lunch alone. I looked like just another old mountain man who had wandered down into the city with my worn flannel shirt and work boots. I sat on the other end of the bench. "Dr. Holloway," I said, my voice quiet. She looked up, startled, a hint of suspicion in her eyes. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" "No, ma'am," I said, "but I know you. I know you've been wrestling with the equations for neutron moderation in a heavy water matrix, and I know you've been unable to account for the minor isotopic decay of tungsten in the shielding. You've been treating it as a constant, but it's a variable." The color drained from her face. I had just recited, verbatim, the central problem of her top-secret research for the past 6 months, a problem she hadn't discussed with anyone. This was the caretaker's gift, a whisper of impossible knowledge through the stone in my pocket. "Who are you?" she stammered, her sandwich forgotten. "I'm a man who works for a group with a vested interest in the long-term survival of terrestrial biology. We're working on a power generation project, a new kind of reactor, and we believe you are the only person with the vision to help us." I placed the old surveyor's transit on the bench between us. "This is a scanner. It's an advanced spectrometer. Take it. Tonight from your office window, point it at the west wall of building K25 on the Federal Research Campus. Just look. If you don't like what you see, throw it in the river. We will not bother you again." I got up and walked away without another word. That night, from a hilltop overlooking the town, I watched. I saw the light on in her office late into the night, and I knew the moment she did it. A faint, psychic tremor of pure shock came through my link with the caretaker. Arlene Holloway, pointing the alien device at a building a mile away, had just seen a perfect, real-time quantum analysis of the enriched uranium being stored inside. The scanner showed her things, details of isotopic separation and decay, that no human instrument could possibly have detected. She had just seen the impossible. The next morning, she was waiting for me on the same park bench. Her face was pale, and she hadn't slept. She clutched the scanner in her hands as if it were a holy relic. She looked at me, her eyes wide, with a universe of new, terrifying questions. "Yesterday," she said, her voice trembling, "I would have said what you're doing is impossible. Today, I'm not so sure. Who are you working for?" I smiled, a tired, old miner smile. The first seed of our impossible conspiracy had just taken root.
Arlene was the first pebble that started an avalanche, but she wasn't the last. Over the following years, our quiet conspiracy grew, like the roots of a tree in the dark. We were careful, we were patient. The caretaker, through the stone in my pocket, was our compass. She could sense the disillusionment, the curiosity, the moral doubt in the hearts of the people we approached. We found engineers tired of building weapons, geologists who saw more than they were allowed to say, logisticians who could move strange cargo without asking questions. We became ghosts inside the system, gathering knowledge, materials, and allies one by one. The years passed. The world above changed. The Cold War cast a long, dark shadow. Nations built bigger and bigger bonfires, threatening to burn each other down, not knowing their shouts were attracting far worse predators. And below, in the quiet of the Appalachians, we fought our own, much more important war. We became what the caretaker called Project Echo, a faint, barely audible echo of sanity in a world gone mad. There were setbacks. There were moments when I thought all was lost. But whenever we were on the brink, the caretaker would uphold her end of the bargain. Sometimes it was a subtle hint, an idea that suddenly occurred to the right person at the right time. Sometimes it was more direct. Once, a Soviet spy satellite, off course and in a position to photograph one of our clandestine operations, suddenly malfunctioned, struck by a micrometeorite. We never asked how. We just kept working. It took almost 30 years before we could deliver the first shipment. Not a bomb, just a small, perfectly refined sphere of plutonium-239, the heart of their new engine. I took it myself to the hidden entrance in the old lava tube. The caretaker was waiting for me. She took the container in her long, elegant hands, and I felt a wave of gratitude so deep, so ancient, that it made my chest ache. "This is a beginning," she projected. "A drop in the ocean of what we need, but it is hope." And she kept her word. That night, astronomers all over the world recorded strange, inexplicable atmospheric phenomena. A thin, almost unnoticeable layer of ionized particles enveloped the entire solar system. To humanity, it was just a curious anomaly. But I knew what it was. It was the Silurians closing the door behind them. They were erasing their trail, making Earth invisible to those who search in the dark. And so, here I am, an old man in an old cabin on a mountainside. Arlene is long gone. Many of the others are gone too. But the work continues. Project Echo lives on, passed to a new generation we carefully selected. They continue the quiet, unseen work of saving two worlds. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I sit on the porch, holding the warm, smooth stone in my hand, and I listen. I listen to the whispers from beneath the earth. It's the caretaker. She tells me of stars I will never see, of music I will never hear. She tells me of her people, still sleeping, dreaming of a silver sky. And I tell her of the world above,
of the sunrise over the mountains, of the taste of cold spring water, of the stubborn, unbreakable hope of my strange, loud, self-destructive species. I started this story as a miner who found something in the dark, but the truth is, this isn't my story. It's the story of a promise made in the quiet beneath the earth, between the last of her kind and a simple old digger. Our work is not yet finished. Perhaps it never will be. But as long as we remember, as long as we work, as long as there is at least one voice whispering back at the darkness, there is hope. For them and for us. I'm still digging. Only now, I'm not digging for coal. I'm digging for a future.